Hello, I'm Amanda Walker, and welcome to Inside America, the show that brings you insight and analysis of the biggest issues facing America right now. In today's episode, the race for online dominance in the 2024 US election. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are desperately vying for hits in a crowded media landscape.
Do you think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
With its viral campaign memes, Harris's social media campaign has hit the ground running, leaving Donald Trump to play catch-up with Gen Z influencers.
My kids say, Dad, you have no idea how big this interview is.
Coming up, we ask what it's like to be at the center of this new media landscape.
All of us being, millennials, Gen Zers, and with our phone making things happen, it's an exciting time.
And how can voters find clarity in a sea of mis- and disinformation?
If it feels really emotionally appealing, that's something that should make you suspicious, regardless of what side you're on.
So it's not the first time technology has played a major role in a US election. The 2008 contest was famously called the Facebook election because Barack Obama successfully used the social media platform to galvanize the youth vote in huge numbers. And politicians can't fail to recognize social media's increasing importance when polls show around a third of Americans under 30 get their news from TikTok. That's why the Trump campaign has courted conservative influencers in a bid to appeal to young male voters, and why, for the first time this year, the Democratic National Convention accredited 200 social media influencers, highlighting a new dawn in political coverage.
I'm officially in Chicago for the DNC. I have my smart.
Creators are having their moment and loving every second. Happily partisan, these DNC cheerleaders flooded social media with pro-Harris messaging. It's a win-win for the Democrats. Not only can they reach millions of fresh voters, but they also don't have to worry about hardball questions.
All right, I'm at the Democratic National Convention asking politicians, if Kamala was a dish, what would it be? And if Trump was a dish, what would it be?
Journalists often have to beg for the kind of access that was bestowed upon these influencers.
Here we go, y'all!
Jamel Franklin was one of them.
When you're talking, it's incredible what is happening, because gone are the days when it was a white middle-aged man telling the nation what the news was. You are there on the ground representing, content creators are representing people of all different kinds of backgrounds. What's it like being at the center of what feels like a real kind of revolution when it comes to the media?
Yeah, no, I think it's exciting. It's exciting times. I mean, I was thankful to represent my community, but there were all types of communities represented with the different creators, from the disabled community to LGBTQ plus community, women's rights. Like it was so vast. And so that was just to see that happen and see that kind of come to life. And all of us being, millennials, Gen Zers, and, with our phone making things happen. It was, it's an exciting time. And I think media is changing in that direction.
Kamala Harris's nomination has energized the Democrats' social media game in a way not seen since the Obama days.
All I know is my kids say, Dad, you have no idea how big this interview is. I said, don't tell me that.
Republicans are also getting in on the act. Donald Trump's interview with right-wing Gen Z streamer Aiden Ross was a direct appeal to young male voters.
Check out this rap and let me know your honest thoughts.
I think it's incredible.
Ross hit his testosterone-fueled followers right in their fantasy Christmas lists by presenting the Republican candidate with a wrapped MAGA Cybertruck.
Just like the
Kamala Harris's running mate Tim Walz appeared on the popular Subway Takes account, a double whammy aimed at Gen Z.
My take is the most neglected part of home ownership is the gutters. It's personal for me.
While also bolstering his appeal with the all-American dads demographic.
Caused a lot of problems.
This is the kind of highly targeted campaigning that the nightly news can't offer. In an election likely to come down to the slimmest of margins, these are opportunities that cannot be missed.
So a snapshot there of how both political candidates are trying to dominate social media and reach demographics that could be crucial to their campaigns. But the online space isn't all about brat summers and funny memes. There's a darker side to it all. Disinformation is rampant. So how worried should we be, and how can voters separate fact from fiction in this uncharted media terrain? So to unpack all this, I sat down with Professor Jen Goldbeck from the College of Information at the University of Maryland. And I started by asking her how she would describe the media environment we're in.
Chaotic is probably the best term for it. What we're seeing, I think, especially with social media, is people feeling like there's a failure in some parts of the mainstream media, that they're not getting the information they want from either side. And content creators are really filling that space for them. They're allowing us to find not necessarily neutral takes on the news, but that feel like they align with our own values and the kind of fact-checking or storytelling that we want to see. And it makes it interesting to look at it as a whole and just how many different narratives and stories there are.
And we've seen this huge effort, particularly on the part of the Democrats, also a bit at the Republican National Convention, to really court these content creators and influencers. What's in it for the political parties?
Yeah, trust is really the core issue there, right? People connect with these influencers. They create these parasocial relationships where they really feel like they know them, and then they trust them. So if you can get trusted influencers to bring your political message out to their hundreds of thousands of followers, millions of followers, that has such an effect of having someone that they trust bringing that message, as opposed to a traditional news source or the parties themselves, who may be met with a little more suspicion.
And trust is a big issue here, isn't it? How do you quantify a trusted influencer?
Yeah, well, first it depends on who their followers are. So you will have people on the far right, maybe being paid by Russia, who are very trusted by certain parts of like far right conservative social media consumers. On the left, you've got such a range of people, right? Celebrities who don't necessarily have any political expertise, or people who are really wonky, people who used to be at mainstream journalistic institutions, who are now bringing their own kind of independent take. So there's such a wide range of people and their skills and their credentials. But if you appeal emotionally to your followers, it's going to build that trust in what you have to say.
But so trust becomes subjective rather than something you can actually verify.
Yeah, this is so interesting. I've been looking at trust my whole career, and there's a trust like, is this reliable? Is this true? And then there's a trust of like, should I watch this movie? Does it match my opinion? Right? And that doesn't have anything to do with truth. It just has to do with like what I feel is right. And now we're in this space where like news maybe shouldn't be that, but we are in a space where people are looking for someone who's going to come from their opinionated perspective and bring them information that way.
So the parties are investing a lot of time and money in these influencers and content creators. Can we measure yet? Is it paying off?
We can't really tell, but there are some signs. So if we look just in the last week, we've had this story of the Russian government, Russian agencies paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to conservative commentators to influence the views of their followers. That certainly says something about how much at least the Russian government thought that was important. If we look at it's sort of less state involved kind of things and just look at how much are we paying influencers to create that content, maybe for sponsored content, we don't know. It's so hard to measure what impact social media has on elections. And we've been trying to do that since 2016. How do you quantify that? I think the goal of these campaigns is find the people who are going to get your message out there, pay the money to get it out there, just as something like you would with your advertising budget, and hope that it moves hearts and minds.
What are your observations about the Trump approach to social media versus the Harris approach?
There's such a stark difference in the age brackets that are going to be targeted. I'm on all the Trump mailing lists and, following a lot of the influencers on both sides. And we see from the Democrats, a much more youth-oriented appeal to content creators. And on the right, there are younger content creators that the Trump campaign is connecting to, or that Republicans in general are connecting to. But they tend to bring a message that's appealing to an older audience. The right has been very good at memes for a long time, and the left has sort of struggled. That really seems to have flipped, where there's just this kind of meanness to the memes of the right that appeals certainly to some young people, but that tends to appeal to older voters. And it just, especially now since Harris has become the candidate, we see a real youth appeal from the social media side there that we don't really see picked up for Trump.
You alluded to it before, but disinformation, misinformation, how much of a threat is that? And can you just characterize the difference between the two as well?
Yeah, so we have misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation can be accidentally sharing incorrect information. Disinformation would be more of a campaign intended to get incorrect information out there. We have both of those at play. People on the left and the right are equally susceptible, which is a thing that we don't necessarily get in the mainstream narrative. We hear a lot about the right and mis and disinformation because, frankly, they've been very effective with it in the past few election cycles. But people on the left are just as susceptible to hearing it. And I think the real problem that we look at now and why it's such a big threat in this election is that the social media platforms themselves used to take a much more active role in policing that. So if we look back to the 2020 election, we're in the middle of COVID, we're in a kind of unprecedented election, and they were labeling content as misinformation. They were taking some content down. They've kind of given up on that in this election. And so now there's more of it being generated, and also there's less checks out there to just flag it as like, hey, this is something that you maybe need to look at more.
So what can voters do to protect themselves against all of that? Because the next few weeks are crucial. People are deciding who they want to be the president of their country, and they're flooded with this stuff, much of which just could be completely inaccurate. So what should they watch out for?
So if it feels really emotionally appealing, that's something that should make you suspicious, regardless of what side you're on. Because one of the things that we're able to accomplish with mis and disinformation is to find that thing you really emotionally care about and feed you information in a way that's designed to appeal to that, to get that emotional reaction. So if you find yourself having that, the strong emotional yes response, or no, but definitely the yes, you want to go out and really try to verify that. Now, this creates more work for the news consumer. Nobody wants to be doing that to do their own fact checking. But on something, especially if you're thinking about sharing it with others, take the 1 minute, do a search to see if you can find an authoritative source that's telling the story in the same way as what you've seen. If we could just have people doing that for the information they're passing on to other people, it would have a really positive effect on cutting down on the partisan sharing of this information.
And your prediction for the next few weeks in terms of what we're going to see, is it just going to go into overdrive on social media from each campaign, do you think?
I think so, absolutely. The time that we have in this election is so short. And we saw in recent polls, for example, that especially for Kamala Harris, a substantial percentage of voters feel like they don't know enough about her. Content creators are a great way to reach those kinds of people who aren't necessarily getting a lot of mainstream news. And so I think especially from her camp, we're going to see a big push towards getting more information about her out to the people who are following those creators.
Professor Jen Goldbeck there outlining the power and dangers of political social media. So let's talk specific campaign strategies now. Are the desperate pleas to young people hitting the mark? Well, I'm joined by two young people representing both parties. Ali Motamedi, president of the George Mason University College Republicans, and Jamal Holtz, president of DC Young Democrats. Jamal, let's start with you. So I read somewhere that Kamala Harris's TikTok team is 5 people under 25. It's quite an incredible operation they've got going there. How would you characterize it in terms of the strategy? It seems to be kind of meeting young people where they are.
I think that's exactly right. It's how do we meet people where they are based on their level of understanding. And there's just generally a lot of young people that are using social media platforms, particularly TikTok, to get information. And when you have a credible source like the Harris campaign that has been pushing and putting out their content around American values and the things that they stand for and the issues that they stand for, doing that in formats and ways where where young people can understand and digest. I think the Harris campaign is killing it on that front with sort of spreading information in their policy platforms on a platform like TikTok.
And Ali, what do you make of Donald Trump? We know 2016, he was all over Twitter. That's not really how things are anymore. He seems to be going for these kind of masculine influencers. Do you want to see him branch out from that a bit, considering that at the moment Harris has the Gen Z voters?
Well, I think the best way to really think about it is less so from like the centralized approach, which you can largely discuss with more Democrat campaigns where they do have a dedicated social media team or group that tries to engage in advocacy and activism. I guess the Trump campaign has more so adopted a decentralized approach, and this was the approach that they adopted in 2016 that really allowed them to capture a lot of the I guess, space on social media on places like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, so on and so forth. And I think that that's the kind of approach that they've adopted in 2024. You see social media content creators, people like John McEntee with Date Right Stuff, really being able to capitalize on a lot of the conservative sentiment with a lot of younger people, with people who are more interested in hearing conservative perspectives, and being able to really branch out from that kind of like one shoe, one trick pony kind of approach, and really be able to leave the social media to people who want to produce content, people who do have differing perspectives on why they support President Trump.
Do you worry, you mentioned John McEntee, do you worry about the kind of people that Trump is going to? Because he could be viewed as pretty hateful, alienating. He's said in the past, every time I order a cheeseburger, I order a double, so a vegan out there isn't actually making a difference. Also said, so the gender pay gap is real, but gender isn't. Is that the kind of person you want to see Trump gravitating towards? Do you like that kind of influencer? Do you take on board what he says?
I think fundamentally it's not really Trump's decision. This is a movement that is grassroots, it is burgeoning, it is something that Trump was able to cultivate, right? And Trump was able to ride into victory in 2016. But it is important to consider that there are people like John McEntee who do produce content like that, which frankly I find very humorous. I think it's provocative in just the right ways. I think it.
But is it going to win votes?
It depends on what demographic, and it depends what your objectives are. I mean,
well, not women or vegans, right?
Right, but I mean, what I would say is perhaps the objective is not necessarily to win those kinds of voters, but to motivate the base. I think,
not win women voters?
Well, not just women voters. I think the Trump campaign is focused on winning women voters. I think they have a fantastic policy platform that is centered around those kinds of issues that do concern women and do address them very well. But I also think that there is a space for trying to motivate the base, and I think that's what John McEntee is doing when he does produce content like that.
So Jamal, traditionally issues in elections, we talk about immigration a lot, we talk about the economy. How does that filter down when you're talking about Gen Z voters? What is on their minds? What do they want to see being talked about on social media?
I think what young people are looking for from a social media standpoint, from a campaign, from people who are going to represent them in the White House is people who are going to really stand for values, not based on your political ideology, but based on what's impacting you day to day in your life. And the Harris campaign has took that to the streets and took that to social media, talking about everything from women's rights to choose on abortion to everything about impacting and talking about the everyday fines that we're seeing in our airport structure and fees from transportation. It's talking about the everyday issues that are impacting Americans, and that's what the Harris campaign is talking about through social media, through people like Taylor Swift, who's come out as a endorser of the Harris campaign. And it's uplifting the Tim Waltons of the world, the everyday teachers who are educating kids in our school system, the everyday parent that is working hours and hours on the job. That's what young people want to see. They want to see themselves reflected in the messaging, in the promotion, and how people talk about the work.
And Ali, what's motivating young Republicans? What's motivating you to support Donald Trump?
Terrific question. So I think fundamentally what is motivating young Republicans, young conservatives, people of all strides and political perspectives really to support President Trump and to join into his coalition is really a contrast between the establishment politics of the past 30 years, which can, I guess, largely be described as globalism, right? And the kind of perspective and the policy positions that Trump has, which I would describe as fundamentally nationalist. If you look at policies on the border, on trade, on foreign conflicts, President Trump does personify a lot of those anti-establishment and nationalist values. That's why people who weren't traditionally conservatives, people like RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, Julian Assange, so on and so forth, have been willing to kind of support President Trump in his various efforts. And I think that when we look at young Republicans, young conservatives, and young people generally, right, and what they value, I think they're sick and tired of seeing this country ripped off, and they're sick and tired of seeing the decline of this nation, not just from a Republican or conservative or a partisan perspective, but really from a globalist versus nationalist perspective. And I think that when you contrast the people that are supporting the Harris-Walz campaign, Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney, these warmongers who've engulfed us in all these foreign conflicts in the Middle East under the false pretense of weapons of mass destruction, which I think we could aptly describe as misinformation in 2024, that it really becomes clear what the defining dialectic is in this election, which is, do you want to put America first? Do you want a government that is going to try and prioritize the interests of the American nation? Or are you going to support an administration that has led to rampant inflation, that has sold ourselves to foreign nations, places like Ukraine, with all the aid that we're giving, and completely neglecting our border?
Okay, so misinformation. Is it a good thing that so many people are getting their, young people are getting their news from social media? When you look at the level of just either willfully inaccurate information or accidentally, this is a real Wild West at the moment in terms of what you can actually trust and verify. So is it a good thing to get your news from these sources?
Well, I think that those are always great starting points for exploration to explore further. Social media is always a good opportunity to start a message, but it's not necessarily the place where you end a message. I think people who care about particular topics or issues would see something on social media and take it and sort of I challenge everyone to not just take everything as you see it and learn it for yourself.
So you're both talking about the problems of misinformation, but it seems like your candidate, Donald Trump, is the source of a lot of that. He's still lying on Twitter about the Democrats in the 2020 election, talking about their cheating and skullduggery. There was no cheating and skullduggery. We know that that was a verified election. Everyone else has moved on. It seems he's having trouble moving on. He's also tweeting fake AI images. So does it worry you that your candidate is often the source of this disinformation?
Well, I think the operative question here is, what is disinformation? Who defines that? You know, I look at...
It's things that are not true.
Well, let me give your answer to your question here. Let's look at the Biden laptop case in 2020 and the Facebook suppression, the jawboning from the Biden administration on that. They actively suppressed that story, a story that could have changed the outcome of an election. Was that misinformation? I mean, Mark Zuckerberg came out a few weeks ago. He issued this letter saying that, you know, upon inquiry, we actually found out that this wasn't misinformation, this was a true story, but we flagged it as misinformation and we removed it from our site.
But I'm asking you about your candidate repeatedly saying that the 2020 election was...
Well, I think it's contentious. I think it is an issue that's up in the air. I don't think that, you know, a lot of people try to establish this false consensus among Americans. I don't think it's true at all, by the way. This false consensus among Americans that the election of 2020 was verified, that it was true, that it was all above board.
No,
I think a lot of people
disagree. Well, I think a lot of people whose job it is to verify and investigate and come up with evidence. The people whose job it is.
And who hires them?
Oh, so
and what administration do they work for? And again, like, you have all these public choice questions. Gordon Tullock and James Buchanan discussed this in the Calculus of Consent. You have all these public choice questions, all of these personal incentives involved in trying to dictate policy and trying to move agendas and platforms along. And I think it's really important that we remain critical of things that do seem dubious.
Jamal, do you worry about these kind of conspiracy theories?
Well, I think this is what we see frequently amongst the Trump campaign. They often divert from what's right. And sort of directly answering what's at the forefront and what's in our face. We saw this in the first debate between Vice President Harris and President Trump. The President Trump went on stage and said that the Biden-Harris administration did nothing for student loan debt relief, which is just outright false. The Biden-Harris administration have forgiven over $165 billion to 4.5 million Americans in student loan debt relief. That impacts millions of young Americans in the country. That has nothing to do with the fact that has nothing to do with the fact whether you're a Democrat or Republican. This is what's impacting Americans. And when you throw truth into the conversation with the Trump campaign, they retaliate with spewing more lies. Americans do not need a president or leadership that is focused on spewing lies and disinformation, because the problem that we have in our society right now is that the information pool, the pool of where people are getting their information is becoming very, very tight. And we need leaders in the White House who is focused on spewing the right things for American people and the truth for American people and the facts.
We could go on a lot longer, I think, but unfortunately we're out of time. Ali, Jamal, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So power and influence on social media is one thing, but it all has to transfer to actual votes. We're weeks away now. So if social media is too noisy, you can always join us on Inside America for a bit of context and hopefully some clarity. We'll see you next time.